Hey, how's it going? And welcome back to another episode of the Chad Smith podcast. Today we got Josh Casey and Preston Dennett. Preston,
What's going on?
Hey, Preston, how's it going, bud?
Stoked to talk to Preston. How you doing, Preston?
Doing great. Yeah.
I'm going to just read your bio here just so I can get people caught up. Preston Dennett began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomenon. He's a field investigator for MUFON, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 28 books and more than 100 articles about UFOs and the paranormal. We're very lucky to have him with us today. And if you guys have any questions for Preston, just go ahead and put them in the comment section and I can pull them up for him. So Preston, we were just talking about the Schoolyard landings and a little bit of that. So I wanted to make sure we get into that too today. But I guess I'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to the show.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. I came into this field as a skeptic. Did not believe in UFOs for a second. Was not interested in them really at all. And kind of got dragged into this field kicking and screaming. I did not want to look into this. I just didn't believe it was true. And I thought people who were seeing UFOs were lying or misperceiving or on drugs or anything. But no, aliens, forget it. The stars are too far away. It was kind of my reasoning.
Right.
But it turned out I was wrong. It was way back in 1986. I was 21 years old and heard a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska. And remembered that my older brother, Mark, said he'd seen a UFO. So I asked him about it, and he described an amazing encounter, actually, where he and his two friends chased a UFO down the street. Was very close to them, like at treetop level, totally silent, metallic disc, and really an incredible sighting. And it turned out I knew quite a few people who were having encounters. I had no idea that, like my sister-in-law and several friends and people at work. So that was a real shock.
Yeah, it seems to be the case with a couple of my friends too. I have a couple of friends that I never would have said anything about aliens or UFOs to because I just assumed that they would instantly think I was crazy. But then I wore a UFO Garage shirt to work one day, and a couple of people at work that I never would have assumed would ask any questions. We're like, "What's UFO Garage? What's that all about?" And it just starts a conversation that everyone seems to not really, maybe they don't agree on, but they don't start arguments over that I've seen, not in person at least.
Yeah, I've had no problems. I've had several bosses over the years, and they're all been very supportive. Haven't really, I mean, there was some strife within the family. My dad was like, what's wrong with you? UFOs aren't real. I'm like, no, they are. They really are. My older brother was like, stop talking about UFOs. And I have three older brothers. Mark was the only one who really believed.
At least you had some support. That's cool.
Yeah, I was. If someone doesn't believe in UFOs, I always tell them, I dare you to ask, your family, your friends, people and see what happens. I think you'll be surprised.
Yeah, a lot of people probably see more than they really admit to seeing because they just think that it's a big stigma to it. Which is fading away.
I'll say I relate to that so much, Preston, because I came in this complete and total skeptic, so much so, in fact, my first sighting, I kept in denial for like 5 or 6 years. Chad knows this. And then it's funny, like you said, you saw something on the news about the sighting in Alaska. It took me seeing these Pentagon UAP reports for the switch to finally, click in my head that this might be real. And I dug into it, just like you said. I have family, friends who had experiences, if not with UFOs, with paranormal. And this whole thing is like a rabbit hole to me that just keeps going. Like I dig into it and find out, okay, UFOs are real. And then you dig into it more, and it's like paranormal stuff starts getting, interweaved with it. Whenever I start looking like Skinwalker Ranch, then I get more into it and need to find out like psychics and then, Bigfoot and all this stuff. And, I'm still trying to separate all the fact from fiction, but it's a never ending rabbit hole. But I really do feel like, especially here within the past year, it's getting so much more mainstream. I'm like coming across people I never in a million years would imagine be talking about it or actually interested in the subject now, just like Chad was saying. Yeah, I'm really excited to have you.
It's bringing people together.
Yeah, the whole Bigfoot thing, that was another thing that threw me for a loop. I'm like, no, I don't really want to look into that. And all this, it was definitely a rabbit hole. It was not good news as far as I was concerned in the beginning. I was unhappy. It was just a real difficult adjustment. Don't get me wrong, I think it's fascinating, and I'm actually really excited about it now. But finding out all this was real was just an incredible shock.
Yeah, it makes you rethink everything. It makes you rethink yourself, human history, why we're here, everything. At least for me, that was the case.
Yeah, I'll be honest. When I first got into this, I always believed in UFOs and aliens, but the Bigfoot thing was like Bigfoot and ghosts were always just kind of like, I don't know about that. I believe that you look up in the sky and you see so many stars and you just imagine how many planets are revolving around each star. And you're like, well, we're not alone. But the Bigfoot thing and ghosts, I wasn't on board with that. But now the more that I get into this, the more I'm like, okay, I think everything's connected somehow. There's something going on here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's the same way I am. When I heard about Bigfoot, I'm like, come on, you're gonna tell me, Tooth Fairy's real next, but now I'm open. I try to stay a little skeptical about everything, but I'm open minded to everything, because I never in a million years thought I believed in UFOs. But now you got the Pentagon saying that they're opening up a department specifically to study this stuff.
Yeah, it wasn't like that when I started. The government was in complete, officially, I'll say, denial. And finding out UFOs were real really actually made me kind of skeptical even more so, because I started to look at everything. I'm like, if I missed this, what else did I miss? I don't like to call myself a UFO believer because I don't, I want to know, either they're real or they're not. I don't want to just believe something based on, false assumptions, which is what I had done. I remember seeing that show In Search Of, which was, way back in the 70s, I think, and just completely dismissed it. I'd see UFOs in the news every now and then. I'm like, no. But finally, I don't know, that one report just sort of broke through the armor, and I've never looked back.
Well, that's I haven't seen. See, I'm not an experiencer, and Josh is, but for some reason, I just feel like I've been pulled into this community. I'm not sure if it's because I'm supposed to be starting this podcast or what's my purpose in all this, because it seems like everyone I've talked to that's involved here has seen something in the sky or has had an experience themselves, and I'm not there yet. I keep getting people telling me that it's going to happen eventually the more I look into it, but so far I'm just looking up and talking to this guy.
You never know. It happen, Chad.
Yeah,
I know how you feel. I remember because I came to this, I hadn't had a sighting, and all these people around me had. I'm like, hey, why not?
Yeah, I believe.
Was out there in the fields, though. I was staying up late at night. I was tromping through the wilds, looking up. When someone said they'd seen a UFO, I immediately went over there, and I'm like, okay, I want to see one. And it took a few years, but I did.
Well, cool. That gives me hope. Josh has told me before. He's like, careful what you wish for.
I want to ask you about that real quick, Preston. Your very first sighting. I think I know what it was, but if you can, would you mind explaining your very first sighting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of a tricky question in a way. I would say the very, very first one was kind of ambiguous, and I don't normally mention it, but it was weird. I'd gone down to a UFO meeting in Santa Monica here in California, and there was a contactee speaking. Andy Reese was his name, and he was talking about his encounters, which were pretty interesting for sure. And he said he would try to call down a UFO after the meeting. I'm like, really? Are you crazy? You can do that? And so the meeting ended, and a group of, there was probably 50 people there at the meeting. And afterwards, about 15 of us came out of the building. This is downtown Santa Monica. There's a little park across the street from this little, I think it was a community center where the meeting was being held. And there's traffic, of course, going on every side. And I'm looking up at the sky, and you can't see a single star. There's so much light pollution. And we all get in a circle, and he's like, okay, let's meditate. I'm like, wait, what? We have to meditate? I was not really into that at that time. I'm like, fine, I'll meditate. And we did for 5 or 10 minutes. And then he points to the sky and says, okay, they're coming. Look right up there. And he says, don't look away. They're coming. And it was 10 or 20 seconds of that. Like, don't look, don't, careful, just watch. They're there. And then after about 20 seconds, there was this huge shooting star, is what it looked like to me. Mm-hmm. I'm like, whoa, that was weird. And it was, a bit ambiguous. I thought, well, it wasn't a meteor shower. And he pointed where it was coming from. So it was kind of neat. But I'm like, well, that could have been a shooting star. So that was kind of the first one. But the really good first one was absolutely strange. And it was late July 1992. And I had gone over to my brother Mark's house and his wife, Christy. She's the one who does the art for my books. And she's had encounters. When she was a little girl, she had full-on ETs coming into her bedroom. At any rate, I'm going on in my mind trying to deal with the subject. Even though it had been, a few years, I'm still just going crazy talking about UFOs all night. And it got late. I had to go to work the next day. So I'm driving home. I think it was around 11, maybe closer to midnight. And this is in an area that's very densely populated, Woodland Hills. But it's a really tiny side street that they lived on, Galandrina. I'm coming around this hairpin corner at about 2-3 miles an hour. It's a tiny, tiny little street, so you can't really go fast on it. And suddenly I saw movement out of the right side from way up, maybe a couple of 100 feet. I saw what I thought was a bird, actually, swooping down towards my car. And I'm looking up. I'm like, well, that's not a bird. It's glowing. And I'm like, oh, maybe it's a firecracker. Because, it's late July. I'm thinking firecracker. And it clearly wasn't, because this thing came down right for my car. And it was a ball of light. Just a small kind of golf ball. Well, a little bigger than a golf ball, actually. Not as big as a tennis ball, somewhere in between there. Drops down right in front of my windshield, over the hood of my car. That's all. It was close to me as I am to this computer screen. And it stops right in front of me and kind of like looks at me. And I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. I'm looking at this ball of light, and it's hovering there, and then it starts moving back and forth, maybe 2-3 times, comes right back in front of me, moves forward, dips down, it almost scrapes the ground on the street and goes straight up. I remember leaning my head forward and watching it go up through the trees. And that's all I remember. For years, I would just say, oh, that was my sighting, until someone said, well, what did you do next? What do you mean that's all you remember? I'm like, oh, no. Did I have missing time? I don't remember driving home. I should have.
Oh, wow.
Seriously. I should have turned around and said, Mark, Christy, you're not going to believe this. I saw a UFO. I don't remember. I'm sure I didn't do that. I would have remembered that. I don't remember I forgot about it, actually. I completely forgot the sighting.
Wow.
which is a huge red flag that you've been taken. And I don't know. I just didn't remember. I've interviewed enough people who said this. I had a UFO hover over us. Everyone was in the car. We're all screaming. Next thing we know, we're somewhere else on the road, and no one talks about it, and we actually forgot about it. I'm like, what do you mean you forgot about it? How can that possibly be? Well, I get it now. And it was several months later when suddenly I just remembered. Could have been like a year later. I'm not even quite sure. Just one day it popped into my head. I'm like, oh my God, I saw that. So yeah, that was my first major encounter with, and it was just a little ball of light, but man, oh man, I still can't explain it.
Did you do you remember if you had any sightings after that? Like, do you know if they went home with you? Maybe if you picked up something that followed you home.
That year was a huge year.
Yeah.
Because I ended up having many sightings that year, actually.
Okay.
And it completely just rocked my world. It destroyed my belief system, and that was it. Because it was about a month later that the whole family, Marco, Christy, my dad, my mom had passed away, but a lot of us family members went up to Crater Lake in Northern California, that area. And we had brought this really big flashlight because we were going to try and call down a UFO. And everyone else went to sleep except me, Marco, and Christy, because we wanted to stay up late and see a UFO. And we're sitting around the campfire, which is, dying slowly. It's just embers. And there's tall trees all around us, so you can only see a tiny circle of sky above us, but really bright stars because there's no buildings around there. And Marco screams out, "I saw a light." I'm kind of looking at him like, yeah, sure you did. He's like, "Give me the flashlight." And Christy hands it to him. He flashes. This is a big old 12-volt flashlight, so pretty bright. And he flashes the flashlight at the sky, and we're all looking up, of course, and darned if this light doesn't flash back. And it was, I don't know, I'm going to say 4 times brighter than Venus. Really bright. Not like the moon or anything, but super bright.
Yeah.
And I've seen satellites, it wasn't a helicopter. It was way up there. It wasn't a plane because it blinked on, stayed a second, and then off. And Marco blinked the flashlight twice this time, and it blinked twice back at us.
That's amazing.
I'm like, whoa.
Got goosebumps.
It was absolutely intelligent communication.
That's so cool. Yeah, because at that point you can't blame it on like what are those called? The iridium flares. I don't even think those are around anymore. I think they're all.
You guys get that lag?
What's that, buddy? You have a lag? Yeah, we must have a really long lag. How about you, Preston? Am I coming in loud and clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
It definitely wasn't flares, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Wasn't a plane, wasn't a helicopter, wasn't a
satellite. You guys get a bad lag?
I'll kick him out and have him come back in. We've been having issues with StreamYard lately, but yeah, those iridium flares, that's what a lot of people blame it on. But then when you said that it flashed twice at you, like it's not a satellite. You can't blame that on pretty much anything that we know of. That's intelligent communication. Have you used a laser ever to?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't. But I talked to a contactee, well, a few of them, and they said, please don't do that. The ETs don't like it.
Oh, really?
And of course, it's illegal to flash them at planes because it causes a blinding glare. And apparently, it's the same thing with the UFOs.
Yeah, that does. Yeah, that makes sense. Never thought about it interfering with the UFOs flight, but yeah, that kind of lends credence even more to the fact that these are UFOs that we're seeing, because a lot of people are shining these lasers at these planes or flying objects, but they're not getting in any trouble. So, and that's like a huge federal offense. Like if you were actually shining a laser at an airplane, you'd hear from them.
Oh,
So-
yeah. People have had some real legal troubles because of that. So, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. And
Sorry
honestly,
about that, Josh.
Lights work. I do actually, heard about calling down UFOs well before this became popular. With Stephen Greer and his group, CSETI.
Yeah.
Which, he sort of spearheaded the whole calling down UFO thing.
CE5 events.
Yeah, with the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. But I had written an article for UFO Universe magazine years earlier about this gentleman I'd interviewed who worked for NBC and went down to Santa Monica and set up lights in the shape of a peacock's tail as a publicity stunt for NBC. The peacock is the NBC logo.
Yeah.
And they set up the lights, turned them on, and they're really big, colorful lights which blink in a pattern. And as soon as they turned it on, these 2 UFOs came swooping down to investigate.
That's awesome.
I'm like, wow. The guy I interviewed was Arnie Weiler. He worked for NBC, obviously. And he turns to the special effects guy, whose name was Rick Liebert, and said, look, there's 2 UFOs. And Rick Liebert looks up and says, oh, yeah, they always come when I do this stuff. And I'm like, so I talked to Arnie. I'm like, you got to put me in touch with Rick. I need to talk to this guy.
Yeah.
And he did. And I talked to Rick, and I'm like, did that really happen? He's like, yeah, that absolutely happened. And it happens, before. And he told me another time, which was in, I think, the late 1970s, where he down in San Diego, again in Southern California, they had gone on what was then the top of the tallest building in San Diego and set up a green argon laser. And it was a publicity stunt for a radio station. And this laser would play in tune to Pink Floyd and rock music. And they turn it on, and it's, they had gotten FAA approval, the whole deal. And they turn it on, and this sort of V-shaped craft, giant, with, I think there was 5 lights on each side of the V, drops down over the building about 20 to 50 feet overhead. And there was another smaller one, or maybe the same size, but it was farther up. This just moves right over the building. And I could hear a low buzzing noise, but otherwise it was silent. And it was flat black, really bright lights, but no reflection to them. And moves over the building. I'm like, wow. So I wrote this article about those 2 cases. I'm like, calling all UFOs. You can call down UFOs using lights.
Yeah.
And it was, just a month after that sighting up in Crater Lake with my brother and sister, that Stephen Greer comes to LA to form a CSETI group in LA. He had just started forming CSETI. He was doing a whole nationwide tour, trying to get people to call down UFOs. And I wasn't going to attend his lecture because it was like $300 or something. And I'm like, well, it's a bit too much for me. I can't afford it. And weirdly, the newspaper called me. I'd written an article for the local newspaper. And they're like, we don't know why we're doing this, but we've never done this, but we'll pay your way if you write, if you attend this lecture and write an article for us. I'm like, are you kidding? Of course I will. Man, that's awesome. And so I got into the lecture, and Stephen Greer starts talking. He's like, here's how you call down UFOs. You can do it using lights and meditation and sound. And here's a really good case that I found. And it was the first case he cited. It's a case from Preston Dennett. And I'm like, oh, wow. He had no idea I was in the audience, I don't think.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and he cited both those cases, actually. And, first the San Diego case, then he's like, and here's another one from Preston Dennett, this case in Santa Monica. And we ended up going out that evening to a semi-rural area. This is LA. I mean, it's almost impossible to get anywhere where there aren't people. But we knew a location that was semi-rural. what was the Santa Susana Pass, which overlooks the San Fernando Valley, which has like 1 million people in it. But there was, no houses for a couple of miles around us. And there must have been about 40 of us. And it was a cold night. Even though it was August, it was windy and cold. And we all go out there, and it's a little quarter-mile trek to this little spot that we'd picked. And no sooner did we get there when, boom, someone shouts out, "Look up, what's that?" I'm like, oh, God. And I look up, and we all did. And there was this giant light way up there. It was about the size of a quarter full moon, big, and kind of this milky yellow, white, oddly shaped, right straight up, and it was moving across the sky just a couple of degrees. And I'm like, wow, because I had taken astronomy classes. I was very much, science-based this time. I'm all into biology and science and astronomy and anthropology. I was just really kind of analytical.
Yeah.
And
very science-based.
Yeah. And I'm looking at it and thinking, well, not a plane, not a helicopter, not a balloon, not a satellite. What is that thing? And it blinked out. And something that, it wasn't lightning or ball lightning or
wasn't swamp gas.
No. It's funny, your brain starts kind of working overtime when you see something like that,
trying to figure it out, trying to make sense of it.
And you really don't want to jump to the UFO like it's a saucer or aliens.
Yeah.
But it kind of gets a little awkward and uncomfortable because you're looking at it like, what the heck? I cannot figure out what that is.
Yeah, and Josh has actually seen one stop moving. Like it'll go through the sky and it looks kind of like a satellite. And then Chris would say, "Can you stop for us?" And it'll just stop for a second and then start moving again. And it's like, holy, what are we seeing right now?
Yeah, they will sometimes obey mental commands. I've never had that. I bet I've had some really good sightings over the years that just got better and better and closer and just crazy.
But were most of your sightings of orbs, or do you see craft?
I've seen craft a couple of times. One time I did see a metallic craft come overhead. This was actually during the day, and it was huge. It was a triangular, well, sort of triangular. It dipped in sort of at the base of the triangle. It had 3 giant indentations, I guess, on the bottom. And this thing must have been a quarter mile across. I mean, it was hundreds of, maybe 1,000 feet even. I mean, it was huge because it looked like it was pretty far up there, but it was covering a good portion of the sky. So I'm like, how big is this thing? I couldn't tell for sure because it was hard to tell how high up it was, but it felt like it just 2,000 feet high. And I'm looking from one end to the other going, oh my God, what is this thing? Totally silent, and it blended into the sky in a weird way that's hard to describe. I mean, you almost wouldn't have seen it unless you were looking up because it was steel blue and or grayish. And right when it came overhead, it was absolutely 100% solid. But when it first started to appear, it looked almost transparent. And it came right overhead. It was totally solid and sort of went off to my right and faded away. But definitely metallic.
Yeah, I haven't been into this for very long, about a year or so, but that seems to be pretty consistent where people are saying that it almost looks like it's a cloaking mechanism where unless it's directly over you, you can't really see it that well sometimes.
Yeah, definitely sometimes, because sometimes you can see it no matter where it is in the sky. Yeah, I think they do that on purpose. I think they have that ability to basically turn invisible.
show themselves to certain. Do you think they have the ability to show themselves to certain people individually? Like if we're in a group of 10 people, 5 might see it and 5 might not.
Yes. And boy, is that frustrating for the witnesses.
I can only imagine.
I
Yeah.
talked to one guy, who was a teenager out with his friends. There was like 5 of them, and suddenly this UFO appears, and it's close. So your classic flying saucer, and it's a couple 100 feet away, and it's treetop level, and he jumps out of his skin. He's like, "Oh my God, look, guys, look!" And they look, and they're like, "What?" He says, "Look, right there, and a UFO." And they're looking at him like he's crazy. They're like, "We don't see anything." He's like, "What do you mean you don't see anything?" And they, change positions. They're all doing everything they could to see it, and only he could see it. And I have other cases like that. There was one guy I interviewed, a Navy medic on a Navy ship, a good witness, a trained observer, right? Military guy. Turned out his bunkmate was a contactee, and kept saying, "Oh, I'm going on board all the time. They've taken me since I was a little boy. I go on their ship. They've taken me to their planet. Blah blah blah." And the guy I interviewed, Kevin's like, "Well, if that's true, I want to meet your little green men." And his friend says, "Okay, fine. I will ask them." And apparently did it while they were out there at sea. This was like in the Atlantic Ocean, near the Bermuda Triangle area, actually. Not quite in it, but near it.
Close enough.
And one day he says, "Yeah, well, I talked to them, and they said that they'll show up tomorrow." And so tomorrow arrives, and his friend comes up to him and says, "Okay, go on deck. They're out there." And Kevin's like, "Yeah, sure they are." It was his lunch hour, and his bunk is just a couple of, not far away from the top of the ship. And so he goes up on deck, and of course, this is a 600-foot Navy ship, big, and a bunch of people are up on deck, and there's this humongous UFO. He said it was kind of diamond shaped, hard to tell the shape because it was covered with colored lights and almost looked translucent, but was easily 3 times the size of the Navy ship, Kevin said, and super obvious. And he's freaking out looking at it and runs up to the closest guy, who was, the mess cook, and starts shaking his shoulders and like, "Look, look, look," and could not get his attention. And no one else was seeing this thing. And the next thing Kevin knows, he's on board this craft, looking down at the Navy ship, which is receding into the distance, becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. So yeah, he had a big, long, involved onboard experience.
Wow, that's crazy.
Sorry about that, guys. I had some company pull in real quick.
Okay.
My roommate. Yes, that's fascinating. I was listening to everything you guys were saying.
Before I get off that topic, I just had one thing before I forget. I saw a video a couple days ago where it looked like one of those cubes that people see in the sky, where it's just like a floating cube just kind of sitting there, and it almost looks like there's a sphere inside you can make it look like there's a sphere inside the cube if you look at it long enough, and then all of a sudden the cube just like instantly vanishes, and it turns into it almost looks like a cloud. It's just like a cloud is sitting there. And it makes me wonder if that was something that was observing us and then it just took off, or was it observing us and then decided it didn't want to be observed anymore by us and then just turned into a cloud. And that made me think, how many of these clouds that we see in the sky are actually just cloaked craft? And especially today, everybody's just on their phones constantly. Even when they're outside, they're just staring right at their phones. So it wouldn't take much to cloak from us these days, but that made me think that might be a possibility, that some of these clouds that we're seeing are just cloaked craft. Does that have any, have you ever thought about something like that?
Oh, for sure. And a big, big yes on that.
Yeah.
Because these craft will change shape. I've known cases where people have seen a small orb, just a little orb, like I described it, and it expands into a large craft. Or they will see a peculiar looking cloud, and then boom, 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 boom. It's a craft. When someone sees a UFO, it's intentional. It's on purpose. The ETs know for sure they're being observed and are doing it intentionally. I finally come to that conclusion after interviewing so many people.
Yeah.
And they are showing themselves to people to sort of announce their presence bit by bit in a sort of gentle way without completely,
freaking everyone out.
Exactly. And yeah, they can appear as a cloud. They can create fog on the road before they'll take someone. They'll like just coat the whole area in fog.
Ooh.
They can change shape. They can do all kinds of things. I interviewed one guy. He's driving through, it was New Mexico, and this UFO is following him down the road, and it's freaking him out, and it's close. And he gets into town, and this thing zooms up and pretends to be a star. And he goes to the gas station. He's like, look, see that? That's a UFO. And they're looking at him like he's nuts.
Right.
And
sure it is, sir.
And so he continues his drive, and that same thing drops down again and starts following him again. And that happened a couple of times. It was making him a little nutty because he could not show it to anyone. They were just showing themselves to him and disguising themselves as stars.
That's going to be my luck. I'm going to see stuff and nobody's going to believe me except Josh.
Yeah. Chad, that's why I said that you may have had a sighting before and not even realize it. And Chad, do you remember the video that I sent you where it looks like a shooting star going upwards and then it stops and then it goes upwards again and then it comes down?
Yeah.
Preston, I love to share that video with you sometime. That was one of the ones where, I knew without a doubt that, they mimic shooting stars at times, completely.
Yeah.
And I want to say, as far as the cube with the circle inside of it, on the 60 Minutes interview not too long ago, the guy who mentioned seeing them on a day-to-day basis, he said that exact same thing. It looked like a cube with a spear inside of it, and that was something completely new to me until I just watched that 60 Minutes interview.
Yeah, it's amazing how many different shapes they are. The saucer shape is by far the most common. But definitely like a boomerang shaped, globes, manta ray shaped, all different shapes. It's crazy. I mean, one guy was describing, I'm like, what was the shape of the craft? And he's just struggling to describe it. And he's like, well, it wasn't a hexagon, and one side was longer than the other. It was asymmetrical, I guess would be the word. It wasn't like even. So some of these craft are just beyond bizarre in terms of what shape they are.
Definitely. I've only actually seen one craft, Preston. I don't know if I've told you this yet. I know Chad knows about this. I've mainly seen orbs. And like you were saying earlier about your first year being a huge year for you, that whenever you said that, it struck me so hard because it's exactly how I feel about my year. But the only craft that I've seen so far other than orbs, it was a crescent-shaped craft. And I drew it really quick, like this, and I didn't even know until just here recently, because I'm so new into this community. I can't remember his name. The very first guy who coined the term saucer.
Kenneth Arnold.
Yes, this is pretty much the shape of what he described, isn't it?
That's right.
Wow. It blew my mind. So when I saw this and what you were saying about it letting a person see it, like specifically, I 100%. I mean, I know without a doubt, because I was off my balcony where I've already seen a few orbs, and this craft, it wasn't typical. And I want to say, first off, it was vertically, just like this. I mean, vertically, not flat, and it was transparent with a foggy shaped surface. But I mean, this shape right here, it was that exact shape. And it was just cruising straight above the apartments just for like a few seconds. I'm going the wrong direction, but a few seconds, it's going like this, and it just faded out into nothing. And it's the only craft that I've ever seen, and it just slowly faded. And Chad has heard this story a few times. The very first thing I did, there was no clouds or no fog anywhere, but the very first thing I did was looked at the trees next to me to see if the wind was blowing, because this thing, just glided along. I would guess maybe 35, 45 miles an hour. And I'm just, guesstimating here. And it just slowly, just faded out. But the leaves were just dead still. There was no wind whatsoever. And, it had my heart beating out my chest. And the ironic thing about this, and this is why I told you I agree with what you're saying about, if they want you to see them, they'll let you see them. I tried to do a C5 event for the very first time on the beach with a little group of people I met. We didn't see anything, but I happened to tell one of those people that night, I've seen a few orbs. I'm ready to see my first craft. We didn't see anything at the beach that night doing C5 event. As soon as I get home, not even 5 minutes after I go off my back balcony, that's what I witnessed. So, yeah, it's like it was specific. It's like, it wanted me to see it, exactly like what you're saying earlier. So I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I've talked to people who are like looking up at the sky and it, randomly, and it appears right exactly where they're looking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Definitely.
like, and I've had that. I remember I was at my brother's house once, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around all this, and I'm like, I'm going to go outside and see if I can see anything. And I go outside, and immediately this shooting star comes down. I'm like, well, that's a shooting star, and it appeared right where I was looking. And I'm thinking, I wonder if that was a shooting star. It probably was. And then another one appears right. I'm like, huh. It kind of made me angry because I'm like, what? Please come closer. I don't want to see it. Give me something that's undeniable.
Right.
And I have had that. Another time I was up in Topanga Canyon, which is not far from where I live now. It's a huge UFO hotspot. I actually wrote an entire book about a wave of sightings there, which was 1992 to 94. And it was the tail end of that sightings. I went up there with the CSETI group. And in fact, there was CSETI groups all across the U.S. doing it on the same night with sort of a group thing. And normally, I'm kind of late in the background. I don't want attention. I don't like to lead the group, right? But they're like, it's your turn. It's your turn. I'm like, fine. I will organize it and I will do the meditation and so forth. And so I did. And there was a group of, 7 of us or so. And we're out there in the fields, sitting around in a circle, meditating. And I suddenly got this feeling that they were there. The ETs were like above us. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to open my eyes. I'm not going to stop the meditation. But I couldn't help it myself because I just kept getting this feeling. Look up, look up, look up. We're here. We're look up, look up, look up. Mm-hmm. So I opened my eyes and I looked up. And it's literally the second I looked up, this dot of light appears. And it was just a dot, like a star, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm not kidding, it covered half the sky, most of the sky. I mean, it was huge. And this was kind of like if you were standing under a glass table and someone's pouring milk on it, and it just kind of spreads outward. It was huge. And it happened it took maybe a second to 3, 5. I mean, I suppose it could have been 5 seconds, but definitely no more than that. And it winked out. And I looked down at the group, and I'm looking at everyone who has their eyes closed. I'm like, oh, shoot. How am I going to deal with this? And finally, that meditation ends. I'm like, well, guess what, guys? I saw something. And they're looking at me like, what? Are you crazy? I'm like, no, for real. I did. And found out later, because I was, putting up flyers and trying to, collect sightings. There was another sighting about 2 miles away at the same exact time from where I was. So someone else saw it too.
That's awesome. Yeah, so that just makes me wonder if, since you saw it and that other person saw it, were you two the only people that were supposed to see it, or are there others out there that were on the list for that day?
Yeah,
sort of thing.
I bet there's, because the MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, and NUFORC, the National UFO Reporting Center, are the 2 biggest UFO reporting centers, certainly here in the U.S. And they get a dozen reports daily, average. And I can tell you for sure that most people do not report their sighting to MUFON or New Fork or the police or the Air Force or anybody. They won't even tell their own family.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say 1 in 10 would be generous. It's really closer to 1 in 100. Almost nobody reports their sighting.
Yeah.
So that would mean that, there are 100 reports daily, which means pretty much at any given moment, someone is seeing a UFO. So I'm thinking, yeah, lots of people saw it.
Wow.
That one. Lots of people are seeing this all the time. They just don't talk about it.
Never thought about that before until you just said I got goosebumps, and you said pretty much at all times somebody is looking up and seeing a UFO. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Right now, I am
Right now, somebody's
absolutely convinced. Yeah, they are being pulled on board. Not only seeing it, but they're being taken on board.
Really?
For sure.
Ooh, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Very early on, I heard a quote from J. Allen Hynek. And if you're all in this field for a while, you'll know who J. Allen Hynek is.
I'm from Michigan. I'm actually in Michigan right now, so he's known around here for the swamp gas situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's an astronomical consultant for Project Blue Book, and probably, he's considered the father of modern ufology, and really popularized the subject and brought it into truly, scientific study. One of the first and few scientists, academics, who looked at UFOs as a real thing. There was just a handful of people. James McDonald, an atmospheric physicist from Arizona, Leo Sprinkle, a scientist from Colorado. I think that's pretty much it. Jacques Vallée, an astronomer. But really, almost nobody was looking into it. Jacques Vallée, I heard a quote from him. This was like right when I got involved in this field. It said, 1 in 40 people have been taken on board.
Wow.
1 in 40 of the population?
Yep. And I thought to myself, no way. You are out of your mind.
Right.
So that would mean I know someone who's been abducted. I know 40 people.
Yeah.
Sure, I do. Between my family, I've got a big family. They have their friends. And we had 20, 30 people at my office where I worked. I'm like, that means probably someone at work is an abductee, probably one of my friends. So that's what got me to ask everybody. And boy, did I get a shock when I found out that I did have a friend who had missing time.
Wow.
And my sister-in-law did see aliens face to face. So did my other sister-in-law. And I brought it up at work and found 2 people who fit that profile. So I'm like, oh my God. J. Allen Hynek is right. This is not uncommon. I ended up writing an article for the MUFON Journal called 1 in 40 because I started surveying all the literature on this and getting quotes from Jacques Vallée and Whitley Strieber and Bud Hopkins, who were saying this is an invisible epidemic. It's pretty common. And I wrote this article, and it was a year later that the Roper organization, a polling organization, did a poll on UFO abductions to see how common they were. And they asked a bunch of questions, asked like thousands of people, and trying to determine how common UFO abductions are. And they found, according to their survey, it was 1 in 50, and which is pretty close to what Hynek said. And I remember the editor of the MUFON Journal actually wrote me a letter and said, wow, that article you wrote, you really predicted it. That was really close. Good job. And I'm like, well, no, it wasn't me. It was Hynek, but thanks. Thanks anyway. But yeah, this is common. I'm telling you, someone right now is likely being taken on board. This is happening to millions of people.
That's a statistic that I'm sure a lot of people aren't aware of, because I haven't heard. I guess I've probably heard it before. I just haven't heard it put it that way, where it literally right now someone somewhere is experiencing something like that. Yeah, do you think out of the how many out of the 1 out of the 40 even remember the experience or even know that they had missing time? Do you think it's like half? I would just assume maybe half of them don't even know that they were taken.
Yeah, I would say probably less. 1 in 40 out of the 1 in 40.
Yeah.
Probably. I mean, seriously, because I mean, here's an example. Because when I heard that, like, I was talking to Diane at work, and she's explaining her sighting with her whole family, and in walks Dorothy. She's like, "Oh, Dorothy, I love Dorothy because she's unfiltered, she's funny, she's like UFOs. Oh my God, I saw one." I'm like, "Really? Oh my God, tell me what happened." And she says, "Well, I was about 14 years old or so, 15, and she had gone to the library with her friend Carol. This is in Koreatown, part of LA. And the library closes at 9 o'clock. And so they came out of the library 5 minutes early so they could smoke a cigarette before her mom showed up. And as they're sitting there on the steps of the library, this star-like object drops down out of the sky, and it's hovering over the telephone wires across the street. And she said it was a saucer-shaped object with colored lights around the circumference and metallic, totally silent. And they're freaking out. And the mom shows up at 9 o'clock. And they're like, Mom, look. And she's like, oh my God. I ended up interviewing all three of them. And she puts them into the car because she's freaking out a little bit. And this thing follows them home. They live 5 minutes from the library, real close. I mean, it's like just a block or two. And this thing is right above their car, following them home. And the kids are like screaming, and mom's like, keep quiet, and they're racing home. And they get home. She rushes them into the house. They go up to the second story and look out the window, and this thing is right there, treetop level, kind of looking at them. It darts back and forth and back, and then takes off straight up into outer space. And they're like, oh my God. So Carol at this point looks at the clock. She's supposed to be home at 9:15. There's a curfew for her. She looks at the clock, it's 10:15. And she's like, oh my God, Dorothy, it's 10:15. I've got to go home. And she did not want to go outside because she was scared to death this thing was going to drop down and take them. And so she's telling this whole story, and I'm like, Dorothy, are you sure? She's like, I have no idea what happened to the time. This was before Bud Hopkins' book, Missing Time, had been, published by a major publisher. It had been published. I had the book, so I knew what missing time meant. But Dorothy sure didn't. She had no idea. And this was not a time when the subject was as well known as it is now. I mean, missing time was not being talked about really at all. And I'm like, Dorothy, I think you might have been taken on board. She's like, wait, what? Why would you say that? I'm like, well, what happened to the time?
Right.
And I talked to all three of them about it. And they're like, I don't want to know. Because I'm like, well, people do go under hypnosis. And they're like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, like a regression.
Right.
Oof.
So, yeah, this is far more common. And I don't think that most people who have this experience even realize necessarily that they've had missing time, because it's so easy to lose track of time. You can be like, how'd it get to be an hour later? And you just move on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something that excuse me, Chad doesn't even know this. Recently, my investigator Seb Talk. I was recently talking to her about my very first sighting at the Cape Fear River, where me and my best friend, who I happen to share a near-death experience with, we both see what looks like a simple, star that curves, off like in the blink of an eye, just gone. And it wasn't long ago, Seb was asking me, like, what happened that night whenever you guys were talking about that. And I just never thought about it. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't remember what we talked about. I know that we mentioned it the next day, and it's kind of like we just moved on from it. And I never really put too much thought into it until here very recently. And that's not to say that anything did happen to me, but I really don't remember. I know we were catfishing that night, but to me, I feel like whenever two people who are aware that a star shouldn't move in a pattern like that, I feel like it should have had more of a shock factor on us. But for some reason, it's like, we saw it and talked about it really briefly and just moved on with the rest of our night. And I really I didn't pay attention to the time at all that night. So, I have no idea, if we did have any missing time or not. But it really does have me wondering, and it makes me think, like Chad was saying earlier, how many people have missing time and have no idea that they had missing time to begin with.
Yeah, when someone describes exactly what you've described, that's a huge red flag for me. I'm just saying, like when someone's emotional reaction is a little bit off, like you're not jumping up and down, like it's like, oh, a UFO, and then you just kind of. And another thing I've noticed. Before? Oh yeah,
I've heard of that before. Joe and Ben from UFO Garage, they were talking about that, where they had a sighting. Where were they? Sedona, I think. And they didn't talk about it until they got back on the podcast, and Ben brought it up, and Joe was like, wait a second, dude, we've never talked about that before. And it was like they were coming to grips with it on the air. They're like, why didn't we freak out about that more? Why wasn't that more of an issue? We're just now talking about it. And it's like, huh. It's like they cleared your memory kinda just to make you not freak out.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Another thing I've noticed is if an object is at all close, like within a couple of 100 feet, that's another red flag that this could be more than just a sighting. Which makes me wonder, because I've had a couple of those myself. Not only that one kind of missing time experience, but I had a couple of others like that, which definitely makes me wonder.
Do you mind if I mean, I love this subject that we're on, but God, this hour's gone by quick. The schoolyard encounters thing. Do you mind if we go on that a little bit? Because I know me and Chad will want to talk to you about that.
Yeah, the schoolyard thing. Boy, that freaked me out when I found out that this was a thing, because I knew that there was some really famous encounters over schools. There's a very famous case in Australia, in Melbourne, Australia, at Westall High School back in 1966. I think it was April, and some 300, 400, 200 to 300 kids and teachers saw multiple UFOs, at least one or two of which landed next to the school in this sort of grove of trees behind the school. It's a huge, huge case. It's Australia's most famous case. It was the most widely viewed UFO event in Australia, and it's still causing waves today. There was a huge cover-up. It was a big, big event. And of course, I knew about that case. And then there was the Rua, Zimbabwe case at Ariel Elementary School in 1994. And I remember hearing about that case. Same thing, basically. UFOs land next to the school. Some 200 kids are on the playground. At least 60 of them saw it. This was a huge playground. And ETs come out in this case and actually sort of communicate with some of the students. It's easily, South Africa's, or Zimbabwe, most famous case, for sure. I started thinking about this. I'm like, I want, because I remembered another case in Florida, which happened a year to the day after the Westall High School case. This was in Opelika, Florida, at Crestview Elementary School. Same darn thing. 200 kids, teachers, UFOs land next to the school. And I started thinking more about this, because I had my own case where a guy was basically had missing time on the playground at a school in Hawthorne in California here. And that's kind of in how I started looking into this. And I started thinking of more cases, like the Hillsdale College case in Michigan, which was super famous, and of course caused a giant uproar when Hynex said it's swamp gas, and people are like, "You're crazy." In that case, they hovered for 2 hours outside of Hillsdale College. 80-some students and school administrators saw it. Police saw it. It landed at one point. Not a lot of people know that, but this object landed in the swamp in front of the school. And
it's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah, I looked into it. I was shocked because I did not know that. That's not in most accounts. But yes, it landed, and a bunch of the male students went out running towards it, and it took off again. And after the Hillsdale case happened, Jamin Coral Lorenzen, who are pioneer investigators, really the lead investigators at that time, or among them, talked about the Hillsdale College incident. They're like, that's the 5th case we've had, or something like this, of UFOs hovering over schools. They're doing this a lot. We think they're doing it on purpose. We think they're showing themselves to kids on purpose. And Raymond Fowler, also a very well-known early investigator, said, me too. I had 15 cases this year. This was in the beginning of this 1966. This is 8 of them. That's almost half, or more than half, were over schools. And Jim and Carl Lorenzen, like, this is likely to happen again. And it was 2 weeks later, literally 2 weeks after the Hillsdale case, that Westall happened. And so I'm like going through all these cases. I'm like, oh my God, there's another one in Wales, Broadhaven Elementary School. So I'm like, let's investigate this. So what if there's more? What if this is a thing? And I found 100 cases, and I can easily double that now because they're just pouring in.
Wow.
And here's where this is so weird. These are mostly daylight sightings. 95% are daylight sightings, which is really unusual because most people who see UFOs, it's going to be at night.
Yeah.
Another thing that's really unusual is these cases are specifically targeting schools. Often a UFO will just fly by. In these cases, nope. It drops down out of the sky or comes from the horizon and stops over the school, or will start circling around the school. And another thing that's different from your average sighting is these are very low level, 100 feet, which is super rare. And even lower, 50 feet, 200 feet in some cases, even 1,000 feet, which is still super low. But in 1/3 of these cases, these objects are landing. 1/3, that's a lot. Actually landing next to the school. That's the kind of MO. And humanoids are seen in a number of these landings. So that's unusual. Another thing that's really unusual is these are long-lasting sightings. 5 minutes would be on the low end. It's often 10, 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, longer. I mean, some of these cases are over a period of days. So that's also unusual. And another really unusual thing is there are no other cases like this in the literature in which hundreds of people are seeing UFOs. Mass sightings do happen in terms of, a lot of people seeing them, but not at sporting events. There's a few, but not like 100, or concerts. The only other thing I found that's at all similar, and it's actually really similar, was equally shocking to me, was drive-in movie theaters.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that before.
Couldn't believe it. I had my own case where a lady at my work had seen a UFO over a drive-in theater. Not over, it came down and parked next to the screen, below the top of the screen, and cleared out the theater. And I was writing UFOs over Colorado, and I got 3 cases in a row. And so I ended up doing an investigation, same thing, looking for this type of case. Because the literature on this subject is just mountainous. I mean, it would take you a lifetime to really examine all the evidence. It's almost impossible. There's so many accounts. And I found 100 cases of drive-in movie theater encounters. But the schoolyard thing is crazy because these are little kids. Half of the cases are elementary age, the youngest kids.
I was going to ask you specifically about that. Do you think there's a specific reason why they're targeting elementary kids? Because I noticed the same thing. I always think about the fact that kids are like sponges at that age, and I was wondering, the kids from like the Zimbabwe case, for example, because that's my favorite case. How are all those kids doing today? As adults, like, are they all doing great? And like, from what I've heard, they're all like going to college and they're leading really good lives. Do you think they're intentionally trying to make an impact on these kids, maybe better our future? Because with that Zimbabwe case, it really seems like they were, really trying to warn us about the way that we're treating our planet.
Yeah, which is interesting because that's back in 1994. out in the wilderness of Zimbabwe. I mean, this was a rural area which had no environmental problems, really. And certainly that's not something that's on the kids' minds. It's like, our planet. That was the main message they gave to the children. And yeah, I totally agree with you. I think some people are like, kids, they have imaginary playmates. They have a blurred sense of reality. They fantasize, and maybe they're not great witnesses. And I can see to some extent that is partially true. I mean, I can't deny it. But these cases are so widely viewed. It's not just one kid seeing this. It's all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And kids might have worked together in groups either. And whenever for example, like at the end of that Phenomena documentary, it's like they were, for one, I could see the truth in those kids' eyes. And kids, they're not that coordinated to where they're going to get together in a big group and, all come up with the same story together. That's just the one thing that really I found the most compelling about that case.
Kids are not good liars. As any parent knows, you can tell when you're a kid because they have certain tells, and when your kid is not telling the truth. And yeah, pulling up a hoax like that is pretty much impossible. These kids, in most of these elementary cases, for sure, have never heard of UFOs. They don't even know the term. They've never thought about aliens from outer space. Well, certainly back in the day. Now I think they're more aware of it. It's a big topic today. But back then, most of these kids had never even heard of the term UFO. So they're not feeling any fear. They're not prejudiced. They're not overlaying their own belief system or trying to interpret what this is. They're just reporting what they saw. And you can get this from these drawings that they do. Because that's often what the teachers will do. Like, all right, if you really saw this, they separate them and they have them draw what they saw.
Great idea.
Yeah.
But
one thing I want to ask you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. The way that they moved, I heard something really fascinating about at the Zimbabwe case in specific, and that's the last question I had about that. I think I heard one person saying it almost looked like they were kind of skipping in time or something like that, like the way that the actual the entities were moving at the Zimbabwe case, like they would appear in one place and kind of like skip forward. Is that true as far as that goes?
Yeah, same thing happened in the Westall case, and I think also that happens in a number of cases. They will be there, blink out, and appear in another place. So that's how they move. Sometimes they'll kind of just blink, blink. I mean, sometimes they'll dart or hover or land, but they'll fade away and reappear somewhere else. They do that all the time. Getting back to your question is like, how are these kids doing now? It affects them profoundly for the rest of their lives. I couldn't find one case where a kid is retracted and said, no, we were lying. Nope. They get together and have reunions, like the Broadhaven case or the Rosieval Elementary School in Wales. This is all across the world, starting around 1950 onwards to the present day. And some of these kids are so impressed that they become astrophysicists or astronomers or UFO investigators or teachers, or abductees. Some of them have contact for the rest of their lives. That happened in the Rua, Zimbabwe case. Emily Trim, she's come forward now. She was one of the few kids, because there was about 10, 15 kids who got actual messages. She was one of them. She was right up face to face with the ETs. And they told her, your planet is becoming way too technological. There's a good way to use technology and a bad way, and you could do better. And she started having contact following this and is still having contact. And this does turn up in a number of cases. So I think the ETs do have an agenda I think the main agenda is to just announce their presence and say, hi, we're real.
Yeah.
You better believe it. And it worked really well, because now the younger generations for sure are like, yeah, UFOs, we know. It's like not even a question.
Yeah, Grant Masters said that they were showing signs like telepathically of doomsday visions of no atmosphere and everything dead.
Yeah, I told one girl, stop cutting down the forests. If you keep cutting down your forests, lots of people will die, which is a heavy duty message for a little kid.
Sure is.
So,
Was that the Zimbabwe incident where that happened?
Yep. And there's another weird thing with some of these cases is, the whole missing time aspect of UFO encounters. And if that may have happened in the Zimbabwe case. I don't know if this has ever been really put forth, but the first investigator there was Cynthia Hind, an African investigator. She said that a lot of the kids had confusion about time.
Oh.
And they weren't sure how long it lasted. And some people felt like time was moving in slow motion. I'm like, ooh, that's a red flag.
Sure.
And there was a case in Scotland, Glasgow, Scotland, over Elder Park Elementary School. And the witnesses, the whole school had just gotten let out. And this is when this object shows up, comes for the school, parks over the school, 50 feet up, and just stays there for about 5 to 10 minutes. And the witness is like, well, I'm not sure how long it was because it was like time stopped. And I don't know how long it lasted. And suddenly this object powers up, kind of starts spinning really fast, tilts and takes off over Glasgow. And a bunch of people see it. But most of the witnesses were there at Elder Park Elementary School. And so, yeah, there's a weird time aspect. I talked to one lady firsthand because a lot of these cases I found in the literature, but I was able to track some cases myself. And one lady had a sighting at a Catholic elementary school in Mentor, Ohio. And this saucer drops down out of the sky, or typical saucer, lands in the trees next to the school like they always do. And she got a mental message in her head. A male voice said in English, remember this day. Remember this day. So some kids do get messages. It's not super common. But she says while she's looking at this thing, time stopped. It's as if the whole world faded away. She's not sure how long this sighting lasted. And it took off, and after that, nobody talked about it. It was not, sometimes this is the buzz of the school for months, years, even years afterwards. But sometimes nobody talks about it, and it's as if everyone just kind of forgets, which is another red flag. So here we have a weird time distortion and no one's talking. To me, like, oh, okay. Because there are cases where people have for sure been taken on board. There was a case where a kid had missing time on the playground, and no one could find him, and suddenly he appears, and everyone's looking at him like, where did you come from? And that night he had this dream where he was on board the craft, and he saw other kids from the school there, and they were being given telepathic or telekinetic tests, and all this weird stuff was going on. So yeah, I think some of these cases are way more than sightings.
How about the administrators? Are the administrators of the school also experiencing the same thing, or is it only the kids?
In half of the cases, yes, teachers and administrators are seeing this stuff. So you cannot say it's just kids. In some cases it is, which is really odd because it's clear that the kids are really the target. Pretty much, I would say, the majority of these cases. But yeah, adults see them in over half of the cases.
So that means that half of them, the kids are seeing them, and then the kids are like, hey, teachers, we see this, and the teachers are not seeing it. So I don't want to say that they're calling them liars, but because they're kids, but at least half of the incidents, there's teachers not backing up the students with their sightings. That seems like...
Well, yes and no. I mean, in the Rua Zimbabwe case, they tried to get the teachers out on the playground. There was one teacher on the playground who was at the front of the school minding the snack stand, and kids ran up to her like, there's a UFO. And she's like, shut up. I don't believe you. You're pulling my leg.
Yeah.
And she says, besides, I couldn't leave the snack stand. Kids would raid it. And it turned out, just by a weird coincidence or not, that the school was having a supervisory meeting. But so often, yeah, the kids will run in and try to get the teachers out, and they're like, no, we're not coming out. or they're, for whatever reason, the teachers don't see it. But often they do. I mean, there was one case in New Zealand, in Maranui, New Zealand, at Richmond. I think it was a primary school again. And there was 400 kids on the playground. And there's teachers on the playground. And suddenly the teacher is like, huh, how come none of the kids are screaming? You know, kids are loud when they're playing. And suddenly it was deadly silent. And he's looking around and all the kids are staring up. And so he looks up and there's this giant saucer-shaped craft. It looked really weird, glistening surface to it. And it comes right over the playground, maybe 500 to 1,000 feet up. He couldn't really tell, but it covered most of the sky and stayed there for 10 to 15 minutes. And a kid was coming up and like, Mr. Coveney, is that a UFO? And he's like, yeah, I think it is. And it turned on its, moved off to the side a little bit, turned up on its side, which they often do, and then darts away. But 400 kids, can you imagine? That's a lot of people seeing this. And there was an airport next door, which is actually true with Westall, true with a case in Arizona, Florence Elementary School, true with the Crestville Elementary School in Opelika, Florida. There are airports next door to some of these schools. Schools are generally in a urban area. Nobody else saw it in any of these. I mean, sometimes it's part of a cluster of a larger group of sightings, but often no, it's just the kids and a few teachers who are seeing this and not anyone else around. Even the airports are like, nope, we didn't see anything.
Wow.
Yeah, me and Chad were just actually talking about the fact that, like, if you look at Skinwalker, for example, I can't remember the name, but there was a case where there was two people with each other together, and they both had two experiences together, but they were two separate individual experiences. And the only way I could really interpret that is maybe if they can like tune into your frequency like a radio dial, if that kind of makes any sense. And I don't know how to really make sense of that, but for example, like some of the orb sightings I've had at Chris Bledsoe's, they're up in the sky, and Chad even asked me, how does everybody else in Fayetteville not see this? And I don't have an answer to this. That's something that's really always fascinated me, and it's something I've always wondered about.
Yeah, the whole Skinwalker Ranch is really interesting because
Yeah,
that speaks to the whole paranormal aspect of all this. And just to tie into that, that's located in the Wichita Basin in Utah. And there's a book about sightings in that area by Frank Salisbury. Again, one of the few scientists, he's a biologist who was looking into this early on. He wrote a book called the Utah UFO Display. And he was one of the first researchers to say, like, hey, this is a display. This is a publicity stunt. UFOs are showing themselves on purpose. And in his book, which lists like 50 some sightings, the one that's most widely viewed is a schoolyard encounter at Roosevelt. I think this was a junior high. Could be a high school. I don't think it was an elementary school. I have to look it up. I forget. But all the students were in Miss Winterton's English class. And they were actually inside the school, which is pretty unusual for the schoolyard encounters. Usually it's at recess or lunch. And one of the kids like, hey, what's that? And they all rush to the windows. And there's this flying saucer just hovering over the hill next to the school. And it stayed there for like 10 to 20 minutes, clearly showing itself off on purpose. And this was so low. It was like 15 feet above the hill. So you can't tell me these objects are not showing themselves on purpose and putting on a display. That is the agenda behind schoolyard encounters. It's a publicity stunt. It's like a musician goes from town to town to publicize their album, or an author does a book tour.
Yeah.
It's exactly like that, because they will hit one school and then they'll go to another, and then they'll go to another, and then another.
I wonder if I kind of feel like social media is going to play a part in that, because all these kids are experiencing this, and it seems like they're all just going to get together. I don't know. It just feels like social media is going to play a part in that somehow, where everybody's going to communicate at the same time and get this word out faster.
Yeah, there are modern cases. There's a case in 2018 at West Nusa School in Indonesia, of all places, where a UFO showed up at high noon, and all the kids saw it. The teacher saw it. She pulled out her cell phone to try to take a picture, and all she got was a white screen because this object was almost as bright as the sun. It was just, people have tried to and have successfully taken pictures. One guy took moving films. Another guy took a time-lapse photo, and it came out, and it's pretty impressive. I mean, there are landing trace cases. Some kids have been physiologically affected. They get all giddy or dizzy or tired. So there are some really impressive cases involving physical evidence, and I am sure this is going to happen again, because the first case, the earliest case I found was 1853. I mean, like 150 years ago almost. And that occurred at West Burke College in Tennessee at night. And it was a typical encounter. It was a low-level lights, just flashing on and off, clearly wanting to be seen. But really started in 1950. The earliest case I could find was 1950 at Prestonburg Elementary School in Kentucky. And these two objects came swooping down over the playground, scared the living daylights out of the kids, who scattered. One threw up, another fainted. I mean, it scared the daylights out of them. And the teacher finally got them all collected and put back into the classroom. And it was almost impossible to teach them at that point, when suddenly they rushed outside again because 4 UFOs came down, and even lower. And again, same thing. And I mean, they are definitely showing themselves on purpose to not only announce, I mean, yeah, they want to announce their presence, but I'm thinking, why? You know, why is it so important that they want people to know that UFOs are real and that they're here? And I think, and I'm just speculating here, is that at some point we're going to have open official contact. That they're going to be like, we're here. We are here. We're not going away. You guys need to know that you're not alone. And I think that might just happen soon.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think it may have already, or maybe it already happened in a way that didn't go forward the way it should have. When I think of like these schoolyard encounters and everything, I think about the miracle of Fatima, and that's something I just started recently digging into. And I know some people look at it more of like a spiritual thing, and then other people do look at it like a UFO encounter. Like, what are your thoughts on that exactly? Because I do want to point this out real quick. Chris Bledsoe, if you're familiar with the lady that he encountered, there's been a lot of comparisons with the lady that he saw with the lady in the Miracle of Fatima. And you know, of course, the Catholic Church, they tried to say that that was the Virgin Mary, but Chris's opinion is that it wasn't the Virgin Mary at all. In fact, he was told that that lady was referred to as I can never say that, Hathor, in Egyptian mythology. Hathor, that's what he got in his head. But yeah, I did want to know real quick what your opinions are on the Miracle of Fatima.
Yeah, what an amazing case. 1918, I think it took place, so over 100 years ago. But as far as I know, that's the single most widely viewed event like this in human history, certainly modern history, because there was, I think, 40,000 some people saw this.
Yes.
And over a period of 3 days. I mean, this was huge. And yeah, the church did label this as a religious miracle, but a number of prominent researchers are pulling out these firsthand eyewitness accounts and examining them closely. And some of the people are describing a metallic craft. And they said they could feel heat coming from it. And also there was, in some accounts, these little sort of what we know as angel hair type substance coming down. And so there's all these details that sort of match your typical UFO sighting. So I'm thinking,
didn't you say that Venus came from Venus or something like that as well? I'm trying to remember all the details behind it. I could be wrong on that.
I don't know about that. I haven't heard that.
Okay. The angel hair thing, I think, is completely fascinating. I just recently started learning about the angel hair thing. What is that? What do you think that is exactly?
Yeah, nobody really knows for sure. There's a million sightings, and every now and then, this substance comes pouring down out of these UFOs, or as a result of their plasma engines, perhaps. It's this spiderwebby cotton candy type substance, which sometimes comes down in huge volumes. I mean, it happened in Oloron, France, where it covered this whole area. It happened in a couple of schoolyard encounters. It just covered the playground thick.
Wow.
Happened at Whitsett Elementary School in North Carolina. And and actually covered the playground so thick, kids were like scooping it up. One kid actually put it in his mouth and tried to eat it before the teacher could stop him, and he spit it out. He said it tasted bad. It was salty. It appears to be
that actually happened in North Carolina?
Yep, Whitsett Elementary School in Whitsett, North Carolina.
Whitsett.
That was, I think, 1950s. I'd have to look it up. It was 50s or 60s. So it was quite some time ago. But at any rate, it was really well verified event. A lot of kids saw it. The teacher saw it. He was a combat pilot in World War II, knew what he was looking at in terms of aircraft. But they were able to get samples of it in that case. Usually it dissolves pretty quickly. But in some of these cases, it's so thick, people do get samples of it. And he had the sample sent off to Burlington science labs, and they could not identify it as any known substance. They thought it was biological. They said, we might think this might be spider webs. We're really not sure. You should send it to a biologist, which he did. And the biologist said, nope, this is not spider webs. And besides, if it was that much of it, you would have spiders in it, and there were none.
But, what kind of giant spider makes that much web? Yeah.
No, and it has been analyzed, and they did find some weird, like I think there's chromium in it, and magnesium, and aluminum. Boron was present in some of these samples. And these are, this shouldn't be just lying on the ground. Boron is not super common. And what's interesting, because that does turn up in some UFO landing cases, boron. And also, this is a substance that we use in our own technology to shield nuclear materials. So that could have something to do with it. But the primary theory is that this is a byproduct of the UFO's gravity engines, or their plasma, and sort of a byproduct of superheated plasma around the craft.
Preston, I just put a link for, I don't think it'll let me post the whole link for the Amazon link, but I put that in the description, or in the chat right there, so people can go there and visit that website. And I didn't realize how many books you've written, but that's amazing. That's a huge accomplishment. So, but I saw that 100 true accounts of schoolyard UFO encounters. I'm definitely going to pick up a copy of that. It's just the topic that I'm most interested in, because it seems like there's a reason they're doing this, and they're really trying to get this message across that we need to take better care of each other and this planet.
Exactly.
I hope that message gets across soon enough. I hope it gets across soon enough and things make a change, which it seems like right now. I don't know. This community just seems like it's growing faster than I can keep up with. So hopefully that's a good sign.
Yeah, it's certainly not like it was when I got involved in this field, which I kind of got involved in, mid 1980s, late 1980s. And it was just like a year or two after I found out this was all real that Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, came out. And so did like Light Years by Gary Kinder, which was all about the Billy Meyer case. And Bud Hopkins' second book, Intruders, came out. And that was a huge boost in terms of alerting people to this phenomena. And boom, just like overnight, people were like talking all about this. So I kind of rode that wave, and it waned a little bit, but then more cases started coming forth. Roswell started to become a real big thing, and a lot of books. Of course, the Rendlesham Forest incident, Phoenix Lights, and it's just ramping up. And people used to look at me like I was out of my mind. I would be at a party or something, and I'd be like, UFOs, and people would be like, oh no, and I'd clear the room. But now they're like, oh my God, yeah, I heard about this. And I heard about the Pentagon. Still, we're not quite there. I don't think we're going to have real disclosure, until we can see the craft. Show me the Roswell craft. I want to see it. Show me the bodies, because until that happens, people are going to be more interested in Britney Spears and things like that. It's just not going to have an impact until we have the evidence in front of us.
I feel like if there was another schoolyard sighting like that today, and all the kids had their cell phones out and they were live streaming it, it would be so hard to discredit that. Because if there's 15 different live streams on TikTok and they're all showing the same thing from different angles, I don't know. I feel like if that were to happen today, that would be a huge story. Hopefully.
Yeah, I think it could happen, but at the same time, there's still a cover-up, and the media sometimes refuses to cover these events. There was a recent sighting in Europe, Crimea. I'm not even sure where the hell that is. But, there was 3 different people in various areas filming UFOs, a cluster of 6 objects, which were clearly UFOs, and they were glowing orb-like objects, which were quite large, and 3 widely separate areas, so you could kind of triangulate it. And that wasn't covered really anywhere but in the local media, and that's what we often see. It reaches the local media, and like that case over O'Hare Airport, Chicago O'Hare Airport, that did get national coverage, but you know what? It was almost successfully covered up, and it was for a while, until a mainstream journalist, basically did some deep digging and got some people to talk, and found out, because the baggage handlers and the people who were at the airport, the employees, were told not to talk about it, and didn't. It only came out because of this guy who really tried hard to get it publicized, and did.
Is that the one that now? So is it the O'Hare Chicago? Is that the one that left like a hole punch cloud in the sky? I'm trying to remember if that's the same one I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
It makes me think of how many cases are covered up that people will never know about, like things that are just completely thrown out the window, or people who are just scared to be in silence. Chad, did you have something that you want to ask him about real quick? I had something else.
Actually, Big Willie had a question in the chat room. Big Willie from UFO Garage here says, what is Preston's deepest regret in relation to the subject in investigating it over the past 3.5 decades?
Oh, wow.
Deep question. This is a deep question.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever been asked that before.
He comes in with the hard-hitting questions.
I am honestly not even sure about that. I wouldn't say I've got a whole lot of regrets personally, because this completely upended my life and changed. I never in a million years thought I'd be researching this subject. But for me, the whole saddest part of all of this is that this cover-up. It really disturbs me to know that our own tax dollars are being spent in large amounts. I mean, our own government is pouring enormous sums of money into the subject, and we don't hear anything about it. And they are actually calling us liars. You're lying. You're on drugs. Hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions. That's the tagline. If you think you saw a UFO, you're either a liar or you're stupid or you're on drugs. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And I just really regret that is the case.
Mm-hmm.
That our own governments, people who are supposed to have our best interests in mind, this government of the people, for the people, by the people, isn't. It's just not true. And our own government, and this is true, I think, across the world, are covering this up, and actively and ruthlessly. I mean, if you get your hands on photographic evidence or landing traces or anything that's really conclusive, like the Westall High School case, there was landing traces and they were plowed over by, I'm assuming, government people. And this happens in landing trace case after landing trace case. People come in and destroy the evidence. It's like, why would you do that? Why not just be truthful about this subject? Why not? It's not that hard to tell the truth. It's a lot harder to lie and make up a story. And, that's been our government's MO, and I'm furious about it. And I came into this field so naive, thinking, wow, this is interesting. How cool, aliens, neat. And then found out, like, you're probably being observed. And I think I am, and I have been actually threatened once. Someone called me up, some guy from the military. This was in 1993 or so. This is during the Topanga Canyon wave of sightings. And I had called the police. I'd given them my number. I was going door to door. I was out there in the field. I mean, I was going all out to investigate these waves of sightings. Some guy calls me. He's like, I'm a colonel in the Army. I've got a top secret clearance. I worked in Vietnam doing satellite mapping. I'm not sure he even gave me his name, but he's going on and on about his resume, and basically tells me, this is what he said. He's like, you're the guy investigating UFOs, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he says, well, you should get out of this field because it's dangerous. I'm like, what do you mean it's dangerous? He says, you're barking up the wrong tree. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He says, it's not what you think it is. And I'm like, well, what is it?
Yeah.
And he says, there's no pay dirt in it anyway. I'm like, well, wait a second. Didn't you? No, I didn't say this, but I'm thinking, didn't you just say that this is dangerous?
Yeah.
And if there's no pay dirt in it, what's the problem with investigating it? I mean, he was just kind of talking in circles, trying to get me away from investigating. And honestly, I was really flattered. I'm like, wow, I think I touched a nerve here.
Yeah.
Got
Finally,
somebody
at that point, I'm like, kill me. I don't care. I am going to investigate this.
The more you tell me not to, the more I want to find more out.
And yeah, I have had phone problems where clicking and static and voices in the background when I'm trying to do an interview. The witness is like, what's that noise? I'm like, just ignore it. Because, once you get a witness on the phone, you really, don't want to hang up. You want to talk to them and get their story. It's not always easy to pin them down. But I've had email. I used to send out a lot of, articles and books trying to get published, which wasn't easy. My book, UFOs Over Topanga, I sent to 40 different publishers before someone picked it up. Because people didn't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. That ended up being one of my most successful books, but I had a hard time. And almost every time these, articles or books would come back opened, my mail would come back opened.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what? I've had mail problems, email problems, phone problems. I think UFO researchers are being closely observed, and I'm not the only one. Some researchers have looked into this and gotten confirmation that people who are investigating this have files, dossiers, so to speak, with the CIA or what have you, intelligence agencies who are watching very closely anyone who is involved in this field in any way, and that includes contactees. I've had people whose hypnosis tapes were stolen. Someone breaks into their house and steals what? Not their TV, not their stereo, their hypnosis tapes, and that's it. Their UFO photographs. One guy I talked to in New York wrote up all his experiences, put it in an envelope, and put it on the mantle. And someone broke into his house and took it. Who does that?
Yeah.
Weird.
That's our own government. That's what I really am upset about in this field, is that we can't even trust our own government, who's such liars. They're not going to get away with it. There's just no way.
No, there's too many people involved now.
Yeah. UFOs are not going to go away. There's hundreds of whistleblowers. The cover-up's been a disastrous failure. And the only reason I think we've seen this Pentagon disclosure is because if they don't, no one's ever going to believe a word they say ever again. They're losing credibility.
Yeah.
They're losing control over the subject. So I think they're disclosing involuntarily.
Yeah. Like they're being forced.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring Sonny back in. He's backstage real quick.
Hey, guys.
Preston, how's it going, Sonny? I want to say something real quick on what you were saying. Earlier this year, I started digging into a lot of this on my own, and I started getting really close with my MUFON investigator and a few other people. And like you were saying, I started having, and I don't think I'm any more important than anybody, but I started having like a lot of weird things happening with my phone. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I got a really bizarre email that kind of freaked me out, and that's actually why I reached out to Ben and Joe the first time on the UFO Garage podcast, because I want to be out in the public because things were just starting to trip me out a little bit, and I started having experiences this year, as far as orb experiences, and what you're saying about got my heart to start beating fast talking about this. Yeah, I definitely believe even just experiences like casual experiences, I think they're being observed, and maybe I'm just being paranoid. I don't know. Honestly, I don't think I'm being paranoid because I got a really weird email. But yeah, I think people are being watched and monitored in ways that they're not aware of as far as experiences go. I got an email from a complete unknown just telling me to stop it. That's all it said, to stop it, and it just threw me off guard. Sonny and Chad, they don't know anything about this. I mean, I've been talking to them for months. But
Yeah, haven't heard of that yet.
Yeah, but what you say just really made me feel like I need to say something about that, and that's really why I felt like I needed to get out and start talking more openly about this and not doing it in private and stuff. And it also made me think about I don't know if it was the West Hall or it was one of those schoolyard cases that you were talking about, where wasn't there a teacher or principal who was actually kind of blackmailed, or they came up to them and said that it'd be a shame if people knew that you were drinking on the job or something like that whenever you saw this UFO experience with the kids or something along the lines of that.
Yeah, it happens more often than you think. There in that Westall case, apparently there was a teacher who was photographed. She had her camera and she was photographing like crazy. They came and took those. Now they will threaten you. There are people who have lost their lives over this. There's a number of UFO researchers who have died under somewhat suspicious circumstances. And if you're a contactee, I know contactees who are regularly surveilled. And yeah, the government is watching us, but so are the ETs. ETs watch over everything and everyone very closely. They're called the Watchers by a lot of contactees because they are on top of things. They know exactly what's going on. And I think they're the ones who are truly sort of in control of the situation and are really clever about it and working towards getting this out in a way that will have a good, positive outcome. While the real danger in this is not the ETs. Some people do have traumatic encounters, and some people feel like their lives have been negatively affected, and they're like, they hate it. They don't think it's benevolent.
Yeah.
And there are people who think this is actually demonic. No kidding. Which it's not. That's my personal conclusion, because I studied all the literature on demonology. Because I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to dig into this now. And angels, I looked into that and all of this, paranormal near-death experiences, ghosts, multiple personalities. I looked into all possible explanations. And I can tell you for sure that this is not demonic. I think there probably are a few bad aliens out there, ones who might not have our best interests in mind. But by and large, most do. I think they are in a very concerted effort to help educate, uplift, heal, and inform humankind and try to get us through, stop us from destroying ourselves. They're the ones who I think I've talked to a lot of contactees who don't fear the ETs. They fear the government, because the government will come and abduct them after they were taken by the ETs. And government wants to know everything that happened, like what happened to you, and they give them sodium pentothal and basically grill them and want to know every darn detail.
In your opinion, do you think that they're going to be successful in getting us to change our ways, or do you see this? How do you see this trending right now?
I flip-flop a little bit. I'm an optimist by nature. I think most people on this planet are good. I don't think people really want to, be divisive.
Yeah.
There's a lot of just upheavals going on in terms of politics and religion and pollution and nuclear proliferation and just outright stupidity among a good portion of the population. And it's distressing, to say the least. But I like to believe that, at some point we can come together in truth and goodness and compassion and love. Just let love and truth guide our actions. But I'm worried, specifically because I think these one percenters, who's ever behind this cover-up, the military-industrial complex, the banking industry, the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, these one percenters, the oil industry. I mean, 99% of the wealth is owned by 1% of the world's population. That makes zero sense. That cannot go on. I am worried that we will actually destroy ourselves. And it could be, we might be looking at some terrible stuff kind of ahead in terms of loss of life and strife and upheavals and revolutions. But ultimately, I think we will have a golden age, and that at some point we're going to grow up. We have to. Yeah. If we don't, it's going to be the end. So we really have no choice but to come together and let love and truth and compassion and cooperation guide us, and throw away racism and divisiveness and politics and all the stuff that is just nonsense.
Yeah, when you're having conversations like this and people talk about being racist, we're really just one race. When you're having a conversation about a whole galaxy of entities.
Right, they're all humanoid. They all look very much like, they're more like us than different. They are people like us from other planets. I don't think there's some weird interdimensional intelligence that puts on different sort of masks, which is a major theory that, some very prominent investigators have put forth. Like, some of these might not be ETs. They could be, something else entirely. And I'm like, well, maybe some of them might be trickster spirits, jinns or fairies or various paranormal entities. But most of what we're dealing with, I am absolutely 100% convinced, are extraterrestrials. Simply because if you go outside and you look at all the stars, it's almost impossible not to come to the conclusion that there are other people out there like us. If there aren't ETs, who are we? Does the entire universe revolve around us? No.
Yeah, that's scary to think that we'd be the only people alone in this universe. Really, that to me is more scary than thinking that we're not alone in this universe. And I think about what you said also about being from other Earths, just like people from other planets, pretty much. I happen to believe that the multiverse could be a real thing, and sometimes I think not so much like an interdimensional, like spiritual type thing, which maybe there is, but maybe there's other planets from parallel realities, and it could be a little bit of both, where it's people from other Earths in this reality and people from other Earths in another reality. But altogether, like you said, I think it's just people from other places, whether it's in this universe or another universe or whatever.
Yeah. Well, the fact is there are crashed UFOs. Explain that if this is a spiritual phenomena. What about these bodies? What about these hundreds? It's not just Roswell. There are hundreds of accounts. These craft are secreted not only at Wright-Patterson or Edwards or Norton Air Force Base or all over the place. And this is not limited to the U.S. at all. This is all across the world. There are craft being held in military custody. And once that comes out, well, all bets are off. We know what this is. It's extraterrestrial. So calling this a mystery is not fair. It's disingenuous. It's not true. We know what this is. Our government has known for decades that this is extraterrestrial. We've got the bodies. We've got the craft. What more do you need to know?
Yeah, definitely. Sonny, do you have a question real quick? Because I had one other thing, but I know you just jumped on.
Yeah, I got one for Preston. Hey, Preston, didn't you did say that you used to be skeptical a little bit, right? Kind of a skeptic.
Little bit, yeah.
So was I. So was I. So I want to know what your reaction was the first time you seen something that, like, was your reaction scared, or were you confused, or did you have that I've been lied to feeling, or what was your first reaction when you seen something that kind of proved it to you?
Well, I would say it was like over 5 years before I saw something that was enough to prove to me. So I'd gotten like almost 100 books by that time. I knew it was real. I mean, I knew. I hadn't seen anything, but I was darn sure that there was something to this. So when I saw like that orb in front of my car, I had a bunch of sightings in 1992, I was thrilled. I was over the moon. I was happy. I was excited beyond belief. It was fantastic. I loved it. I felt
That's awesome.
Special even. Like, wow, thank you. That's awesome. You showed yourselves to me. I'm like, I was humbled. Yeah, grateful. Super happy. That's kind of my reaction every time I have a sighting. I'm like, wow, thank you. I love you.
I'm the same exact way. The first, before I had my big sighting this year, I had like 7 or 8, and it was always the ones that just like in the corner of my eye, like where I barely got to see it, or faded away or disappeared as soon as I looked at it. And then finally, Chris Bledsoe just told me, he's like, Josh, you're not seeing things. You're really seeing this come to my house. And like what you were talking about earlier, which I see parallels between me and you. It's so crazy, especially because you're the first person I reached out to. But Chris sensed them coming. He said, I feel like we're going to see something tonight. Or he said, I know that we're going to see something tonight. And he went out. He didn't do the meditation thing, but he sent a little prayer. And I have videos of this. Chad and Sonny have seen this. Within 10 minutes, we saw over 15 orbs. And just like you said, I was so happy that I finally got them on video, that I had witnesses there with me. I was the same thing. I was like, thank you. And Sonny saw my immediate after reaction. I talked to him for like 2 or 3 hours afterwards, just, amped up on adrenaline, just psyched that I finally got to see these things. And I knew for a fact that that's what I was seeing.
Yeah, it affects you. Yeah, I've talked to a number of people who said they got really strong impulses to go outside, and that's when they see him. And finally, that happened to me once. It was so cool. This was like 1994. And I've been interviewing this lady who had major encounters. And long story short, I'm transcribing her interview. I'm like, I'm not so sure. Because he's talking about alien babies and jumping up and kicking an ET in the neck, and its neck snapped. And I'm like, well, I know she's telling the truth. I mean, I know her really well. I still do. And but I was like leaning back in my chair. This is late at night and thinking, I don't know. How can I? This is a lot. And I got a really strong impulse to run to the roof of my condo complex. I lived on the 3rd story. And I went onto the roof, which you're not supposed to do. I'm a good boy. I don't go up there. And, I don't live there now. This was some time back. And I get up there, and I wasn't up there more than 10 seconds. It may have been 20, but about 10 seconds when this UFO appears. And it actually spoke to me. I could not believe it. And it wasn't in English words or anything. It was like just boom, it sends this concept. It says, hi, I'll call her Wendy. We're Wendy's ETs. You don't believe, watch this. That was kind of the gist of the message. And again, not in English, but I understood it. And I don't know, it was a weird feeling because I'd never had that happen. It happened once after that. But I got the message all right. And this thing starts darting around back and forth. It was just across the street, a huge golden, fiery, slightly oval shape, probably about 10 feet across, maybe. It's hard to tell. I couldn't quite tell, but it was at treetop level. totally silent, not far away at all, and just disappears. I'm like, damn, that was thrilling. Couldn't believe it.
You guys mind if I ask Preston there a question? I don't know how much more time we got on here with him. I know this 2 hours is going by quick.
Yeah, it's going quick.
The Chad, can you pull up that beam of light real quick by any chance? Preston, I got a question. I just asked Michael Scratt, is that his name?
Yeah, Michael Schratt. Yeah.
Michael Scratt. I asked him about this yesterday. We got to thank you, Sonny. We got to talk to him last night. That was pretty awesome. Talked to him for a little bit. So the same sighting I was just telling you about, where Chris invited me out to his land, this property. Whenever these orbs started coming up, after the first couple of orbs that we saw, and like whenever we saw them, there was no denying that's what it was. I saw a beam of light that looked almost identical to this right here. It was the same exact color. It was coming up from the ground. And after I saw it, it went away really quick. But I turned around and I asked Chris and the other guy with us if they had seen it. They said no, but Chris told me that he had seen this multiple times with his wife, I believe. Have you ever heard of anything like this? And if you have, what are your theories on what it is?
Yeah, I have seen this before, and it's really, really strange because you hear about beams of light coming from UFOs and shining down on people and that sort of thing. That I've heard a lot. This is somewhat new to me. I've heard only this over the past couple of years, and I've seen some of these photos. And someone has sent, a contactee sent me a photo like this. I don't know what to think of it. I think it does have something to do with the UFO phenomena. I don't think it's like, earthquake lights or something, which I did see once during the Northridge quake. So I know what earthquake lights are. I saw them myself. I think it's related to this phenomena. I mean, it clearly is. And I think they're doing it somehow. And I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. If they're coming up from below, that's bizarre. Or are they? Or is that just the way it appears? Is this a technology? Are they sparking something?
Definitely.
I don't know.
Sorry. That was actually going to lead. I have one more thing to add on to that. I asked a couple of people about this. One person said that he thought it could be some kind of military UFO monitoring technology. I have no idea if that's what it is. I will say Chris does live right by Fort Bragg. It's a big military base. So who knows? Maybe it could be. But my other thoughts. My other question, real quick, was going to be real recently. I've been fascinated with Admiral Byrd and the whole Hollow Earth thing, and I want to know what are your thoughts on that, real quick.
Yeah, I can't say I've done a whole lot of research into it. I've followed it and looked into it, but it's not really my area of where I've researched that. But I'm intrigued. The whole Hollow Earth theory was something I've just disregarded and sort of dismissed because I'm like, I know what our planet is, and it's got an iron core. I mean, there's just no way the Earth is hollow, like a gumball sort of thing. But then I'm like, fine, I'll look into it. And it's pretty shocking, actually, to see how many stories there are that point towards at least large caverns and, honeycomb type structure within the Earth's crust and stuff going on underground. Yes, I think there's absolute validity to it. And the Admiral Byrd case is very intriguing because this is, an admiral. This is not some, guy just out there, without any education or experience. And this was a big expedition and a big deal, and it was covered up. I think there's absolute validity to it. I think they probably did see something out there, and it makes me wonder because there are multiple accounts of this, of people, civilizations underground. I don't know what to think of it. It's kind of puzzling, and I'm hesitant to go down that rabbit hole because I know what happens when you go down that rabbit hole. It leads to another rabbit hole and then another, and you can get lost. I focused a lot of my research on what the contactee phenomena, people who are being taken on board, people who are having face-to-face encounters. That's what I find most interesting. So I'm a little bit reluctant to go too deep down that rabbit hole, but I had to explore it a little bit, and I think there's absolutely something to it.
Yeah, definitely. And it was actually, I mean, I'd heard of it a little bit. Actually, for the first time, it was Ben and Joe that introduced me to it. But that beam of light that I just showed you about, that's what got me really digging into it more here lately. Because, like in that picture, you can tell that beam of light is coming from the ground and not from the sky up. So it just got me asking these questions. And the fact that, Chris had told me he'd seen this before, I fell down a rabbit hole. Like you said, like I'm in it and I'm lost now, and I'm just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, a lot of cases like that in upstate New York, by the way, where there's lots of minerals and mines. UFOs are attracted to mines and places where they're mineral rich. I think there's a lot of underground activity, probably multiple UFO bases all across our planet. That would not surprise me one bit at all. In fact, I wrote a book about the USOs here off the Southern California coast, because there's cases, not only of objects coming in and out of the water, but 100 of them, 100, 200. I mean, how is that even possible? Where are these things coming from? That is a lot of UFOs. I think there probably are bases all across our planet.
Okay, I have a question about that. I didn't know if I was gonna ask this or not because I'm a little selfish since I live in Michigan. But do you have any information on the Michigan Triangle and any significance to the UFO sightings in Michigan to that?
I'm aware of it, and I think it's fascinating because there are certain areas. I've noticed this, having done, written a number of books on mostly southwestern states. UFOs over California was one of my early books, but I wrote one about Colorado and Nevada, and New Mexico and Arizona and New York. I think that's all of them. And every one of them have an area in their state which is a major UFO hotspot. And I think that Michigan has that too. It's just an area where there's an enormous amount of activity.
Yeah.
And I wonder about it, like Sedona in Arizona. There's some speculation about there being a base there. So I think a lot of these cases are probably where there is a UFO base or something about that area where the electromagnetism allows UFOs to become visible, or the magnetic sheets or the magnetic fields come down into that area more prominently and allow craft, because that's how they travel, as near as I can tell, using the magnetic field of our planet. So that could be one of the explanations. Something is going on in these areas. And Michigan is a major hot, one of the more prominent states. California is the leader in terms of the number of sightings, but of course, there's 40 million people who live here.
Yeah.
And I think Texas, Washington, I know Illinois and Florida and Michigan. These are like the top UFO producers, which is really interesting to me because something's going on. Something is attracting UFOs in large numbers.
It seems to be a lot of sightings by water, like swamps and water. And
yeah, that could be it. The Great Lakes, Lake Erie, has an awful lot of sightings. So I think they pick these bodies of water for a couple of reasons. Perhaps because there's something about water that allows them to power their craft, maybe. I'm not saying that they use water as fuel, but that does turn up.
Yeah.
Because they're often hovering over bodies of water. It's weird. And why not? If you can go underwater in a way, hundreds of feet, 1,000 feet underwater, we don't really have the technology to easily access these areas. I mean, yeah, we have subs, but our submarines can't fly out of the water and go back in, and at least not officially.
Yeah, by the time we even got dispatched to the location, they'd be gone and out of here.
It's a great place for them to just hang out and be unmolested by our government people who
take me with you.
Yeah, I think the government, the secret government in particular, does feel like this is a threat. Not so much to humanity. I think they know for sure that their ETs are not here to take us over. They've been around for millennia. They've been intervening in human affairs for a very long time. They're trying to educate people, wake them up to their psychic abilities, warn us about how we're destroying the planet, healing people. I wrote a whole book, 300 plus cases, and that's a tip of the iceberg. They're not here to hurt us, and our government knows it, but they're putting forth this alien threat narrative. I'm like, why would they do that? I think some of them might actually believe it. I don't think so, but the fact is they are hovering over our nuclear power stations, shutting down missiles, hovering over our power sources. I think ultimately it's a threat to their own power structure, and that's the alien threat. It's a threat to them, to their jobs, to their control over enslaving the human race. That's the alien threat. It's a threat to their job and their money and their power. And I think that it's their last hurrah. At some point, humanity is just going to say, we've had enough, and we're not going to allow ourselves to be enslaved and drugged and dumbed down and made to fear everything. Fear is a real problem on this planet. Everyone's like terrified and trying to survive. We have to realize, the universe is a safe place. We're autonomous beings. No one can order us around. We have the right to, life, liberty, and happiness, to food and shelter and clothing. And we should not have to fight to survive every day when there's enough for everybody. There really is. It's ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, there should be, definitely. I totally agree with that so much. I've talked to these guys about how I feel like religion was never supposed to divide and frighten people. It's supposed to like unite and enlighten people, and it's just the governments that have put in these, like pretty much turned churches into a government itself, and use it as a way to control and keep people in check, pretty much to keep money coming in, or just to keep people doing whatever their objective might be of whatever it is. That 1% that you're talking about earlier, that's rich and the rest of the population. I think they're in fear that if people find out about what's going on, and it's going to make people forget about all of our little indifferences, then it's going to take their power. It's going to throw it out the window, because exactly, like things like politics and religion and race are going to go out the window when people realize that we're not the only living beings in this species. I mean, in this universe.
Yeah, I think that's the driving force behind the cover-up. Because once we accept that, we'll realize, we do have friends out there. They're not here to hurt us, and that is going to change everything. People's entire lives would change. Just imagine if we could get this technology released, and we didn't have to depend on fossil fuels, and we could clean up our environment. And there's no such thing as an energy crisis or an economic crisis or an environmental crisis. It would be a new age for our planet. So I think that's really the driving force behind the cover-up is greed, power, corruption. And I hope that these guys are listening and realize at some point it'd be better for them, honestly, if to just give it up.
Yeah.
Why? What is so great about having all this wealth? What are you going to do with it? At some point, they've found this in psychology. Once you have enough money to actually survive, the more money you get, it just does not make you happier. It does not improve your life. People don't need a gazillion dollars. They just want to have food on the table, shelter, clothing, and enough money to live their lives. It just makes no sense to sort of act that way and hoard all this wealth. For what reason?
Right.
How is it helping you? I'd really like to know. To
live on a planet that's just deteriorating because of the industries that are making all that money. It's like, what are you going to use it for when the planet dies?
Yeah. These factories who pour pollution into rivers. I'm like, that's the water you're drinking too. This is the air you're breathing.
Your kids are breathing and drinking. Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you thinking? Think for a second.
Too much money and greed in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think we're improving. Look at a couple of hundred years ago. It was not good. There was no such thing as human rights, really. I mean, slavery was all rampant. And it still is to a certain extent, human trafficking. But I think we're actually improving. or recognizing that men and women are equal,
Mm-hmm.
and people are, in terms of race and religion and all these so-called differences, they don't really care anymore. I don't think racism is really nearly as prevalent as the media might like you to think.
I was just going to say, I wonder if the media is showing us just the negative sides of things and making us think that we're not getting along as much as we are. Because when you watch these YouTube videos of people like us having these conversations, it doesn't seem that way. It doesn't seem like we're arguing as much as the media makes it seem like we are. I don't know. I get that feeling.
I totally agree. Because if you look at the news, why is it always, a shooting, or why does that get so much publicity?
Yeah.
When your chances of being involved in one of these so-called mass shootings is infinitesimally rare compared to, say, a car accident, dying by a car accident, or of a disease, or all these other things which are killing way more people. Your chances of dying in a terrorist attack are tiny compared to dying driving to work, and that doesn't get on the news.
Yeah,
the news is very, very fear-based. Media in general is.
I completely agree. I was gonna say, why does there's so much negative stuff that gets put out on the news that seems like it's specifically for that reason, to keep people in fear. But that for all this negative stuff, there's probably so much more positive things that would actually inspire people, that if they were like put things like this out on the news, it would actually have a positive ripple effect out into the world. But instead they're focusing, like zoning in on the negative things, and it's like it's keeping people in fear, just like Chad was saying. I completely agree.
I think it's important to count your blessings and be positive, because you sort of like attracts like. If you focus on negativity, that's what you're going to be focusing on and creating. And I think if we start looking towards helping each other and focusing on the positive and really working together, we're going to make a lot more progress in that area.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens. I think the cover-up is gonna end. It's inevitable. The cat's out of the bag. I'm not sure our own governments are ever really going to fully disclose, not voluntarily, but someone will at some point. I think what's going to happen, honestly, is a CE5 group is going to have an event, or it's going to happen over a schoolyard. There's going to be another Phoenix Lights incident, and the ETs are going to be like, we've had enough, and just show themselves in such a way that the world's like, oh my God.
Our football stadium here in Ann Arbor holds like 107,000 people, and I'm just praying that one of these days one just lands right on the 50-yard line. It's like, hey guys, 107,000 people see it. That's going to be hard.
That's honestly, I think that's going to happen. Honestly, we have these waves of sightings every 5 to 10 years. Something crazy like that happens, like the Phoenix Lights, or a wave over Belgium, the Hudson Valley wave, Gulf breeze. I mean, it goes on and on. Every 5 or 10 years, a major event happens, which is pretty much undeniable. And it's still people cling to their skepticism. I get it. I mean, I was a skeptic. It's not easy. But one of these days, people are going to have to accept it and just be like, all right, fine. We're not alone. Fine.
Yep.
I agree. I think it's going to be people like us that's actually going to end up getting the truth out. Not to change up the subject real quick. I know I don't know how much longer you have on here, but what implants? What are your thoughts on the implants? Like, what do you think the whole function or the purpose is to that?
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that, because implants is like, people are like freaking out over implants and like, it's mind control. They're tracking us like animals. And I'm like, well, implants are real. This is smoking gun evidence. Dr. Roger Lear removed almost 20 of them. These are absolutely what we would term medically foreign bodies. And people pulled them out, and they're got weird compositions of iron that's similar to meteoritic iron. Some of these are magnetic. Some actually give off electromagnetic signals. There's no foreign body response. So normally if there's something in your body like shrapnel,
Yeah.
It starts to become infected and calcium surrounds it and the body rejects it. The body's not rejecting these. So there's a lot of weird things about them. And what's the purpose? People have been speculating. Like, this is what I think it is. I'm like, why do you think that? They have nothing to back up their opinion that this is mind control or tracking. And I do have first-time cases, and there's a number of them in the literature, a lot, that you can look up, where people have been told what the purpose of implants are. And in pretty much every single case, it's not tracking. Because people have asked that, is this for tracking? The ET said, no, we can find you wherever we want. Each person has their own unique imprint, their vibration. The purpose of the implants, in case after case, and I've got personal cases like this. One lady asked what she was being implanted. They're like, what? She says, why are you doing this? And they said, oh, this is to measure the levels of pollution in your body. And another was told, this is to monitor your vital signs. Another was told, this is to boost your immune system.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah, I
health
heard
related case after case.
I was just about to say, I heard of a case where a person had an implant taken out and they immediately started getting extremely sick. And they wanted the implant put back in. And then I think a few weeks later, it actually was put back in. I can't remember the person's name, but you might be familiar with that.
I'm not familiar with that case. I don't know, but I do have a case just like that where a lady sneezed and out came this implant and she's looking at it and freaking out. And in a lot of these cases, people will set the implant aside, put it in an envelope or a dish, and it disappears. Or they freak out and they just throw it away and totally regret it. Hey, that's another regret.
Preston, I heard one where a lady, like you said, she sneezed one out and she said she looked at it and it was in the tissue and it caught on fire.
What?
What?
Yes.
I've not heard
The implant caught on fire and set the tissue on fire. She threw it in the toilet.
One lady I know had one in her nose and she fished it out with a scalpel. It was just irritating her. Held it in her hand and it dissolved in her hand. Watched it disappear.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, one lady I know, that lady who sneezed it out, she suddenly got really sick with hypoglycemia and was losing weight and fainting and just having real problems with their blood sugar. The doctors could not figure it out. They're like, it's not diabetes. We don't know quite what's going on with you. And she was taking vitamin cocktails and just losing weight rapidly. And then boom, she was reimplanted and she was better.
Wow.
That sounds like the case I was talking about earlier. I didn't know that this person is sneezing. The one I was talking about, this person actually had it taken out through surgery, and then it was within a couple of weeks and ended up getting extremely sick. And then somehow the implant was put back in another part of their body, completely separate part of their body. And after that, they weren't sick anymore.
Yeah, I know one lady I interviewed who did go to Dr. Roger Lear and had her implant removed. And she says 2 weeks later, the ETs came back and reimplanted her. She's like, I'm never doing that again. She doesn't really like her encounters, but some people have a real strong fear response, which I get. It can be very scary. I'm telling you, this is not bad for us. I really looked into this deeply because I was horrified. I'm like, oh my God, people are being kidnapped against their will. These are bug-like aliens. They have no compassion. People are having PTSD and nightmares. How could this be good? How in any way can you rationalize this? And then I started looking at what is actually happening. And yeah, the physical exam is terrifying for people. And in a few cases, it can actually cause pain. Usually it's very brief and the ETs will relieve the pain. But yeah, this does happen. And people have a rough time, especially in the beginning. But it's during this physical exam that people are being healed of a wide variety of illnesses. Broken bones, cuts, bruises, bad backs, cancer. I've got 30 plus cases, a lot of healing cases. That's really good. And people who aren't having a really strong fear response aren't like paralyzed or anything, or their memories aren't suppressed. They're given free reign, freedom to explore the craft. They're shown the engine room. They are shown the helm, the control room. They're allowed to sit in the seat and fly the craft. In my book, Onboard, UFO encounters, there's 15 cases. I think that happened in 5 of the cases. Probably happened in a lot more of them, but some people do have this strong fear response, and they miss out on the good stuff. And you will see this with the research of Barbara Lamb and other major researchers, John Mack. Once a person sort of gets past that fear, they start having really good encounters. They're healed. They're given spiritual information. They become super psychic. All this really cool stuff happens. I don't think ETs are here to hurt us at all. I don't have any accounts of sadism or torture or ETs like, "Muha, muha, I want to hurt you."
Yeah.
No, it's not like that at all. It's the opposite. And so my heart goes out to people who do have negative encounters and just freak out, and it's scary and their health suffers, because that does happen. They're not all our space brothers. I think there's a bell curve to encounters. But almost all the people I talk to, none will say they're, well, I don't want to say none, but a very small percentage will say these are evil. And often it's the people who are very fear-based or super religious, perhaps. One guy I interviewed, he's very religious, and he's sure it's demonic. And I am not going to, disrespect that. It's his experience. It's his right to interpret it as he wants to interpret it. And he could very well be right. I don't know. All I can tell you is that most people do not feel that way, and very few will call them evil. And most will say that they're happy that they've had these experiences. Many will say it was very difficult in the beginning, but ultimately they come around.
It makes me think about just if you were to wake up in the middle of a surgery and you had no idea what was going on. Of course you're going to be freaked out. Whenever I first came to the realization that all this was real at the beginning of this year, I told you on the garage last week, I was freaking out for a couple of weeks. It wasn't until I got in touch with Chris and found out, this guy's been cured of his Crohn's disease. And actually, one thing that you said earlier that not a lot of people know, as far as experiences being allowed to fly a craft, a lot of people don't know this. Chris has actually flown a craft. That's actually I just found this out recently. It sounds kind of like one of the Tic Tac crafts. It might be something differently, but you can actually find this on Spotify. This isn't something that I'm supposed to be keeping private. He actually talks about on his Spotify podcast how he's flown a craft. He put his hands on some device, and I guess it's something that it links to your conscious. And he said he could look at like the trees. He was over the Cape Fear River where he had his first experience. He could look at like the trees and think about it, and he would be right there immediately. It's like there's a conscious link to it.
Wow.
Yeah. Exactly.
I hope he writes a book one day. I don't think he's put out a book, has he?
They're working on a movie about him, but I think there's a little bit delays as far as the movie goes. People want to take liberties with this movie, but you can actually go to Spotify. I don't. It might have been Grant Cameron that was interviewing him. I'm not sure exactly. I gotta find it. But Chad, and Sonny, and Preston, I'll try to find that and send it to you.
Yeah,
later.
I wrote it down, man. That's not the last time you're going to hear from me about that one. I wasn't aware.
I didn't know about that here until about a couple of weeks ago, and I just happened to come across it. And it's a short, maybe like 45-minute interview, and Chris is describing flying the craft. And the guy who was interviewing him was saying that everything that he was describing lines exactly up with other people who have, detailed flying actual craft. And I mean, it's fascinating. It blew my mind, to be honest.
Yeah, I got to meet Chris once. He's the nicest guy. And that's something I've noticed with contactees. They are really nice people. Yeah. And I started wondering, like, who's being contacted and why? Because it's evenly divided between men and women. It's all over the world. It's young, it's old, it doesn't race, even blood type. I couldn't find any real patterns. And the one major pattern, which was pretty much immediately obvious, was that this does track families. So there is a genetic component to this. At least 50% of the cases of people who are being taken on board. So were their parents or their uncle or their grandparents, and definitely their children. It's definitely tracking generationally in families. But another thing I found was shocking, and that's your job, your vocation, what you do on Earth. Because I started getting a lot of social workers. I'm like, wow, John Hunter Gray, he was contacted. He's an award-winning social worker. Michael Carter, he works against racism, was commended by President Clinton. He was contacted throughout his life, was healed of a blood clot. And I started getting a lot of those. I'm like, let's look at people's jobs. And what I found was, a lot of these people are social workers, they're environmentalists, they're animal rights activists, they're teachers, they are musicians, inventors, a lot of doctors, a whole lot of doctors. There are people who are doing good work for humanity in some way. And that's an absolute pattern. A lot of police officers, a lot of people who are really trying hard to make the world a better place. These are the ones who are being contacted. And that's like, wow, okay, this speaks to who these ETs are, why they're here, what they're doing. Their whole agenda is, again, to sort of help out behind the scenes. But ultimately, we have to do it ourselves. And they've said this. They've told people flat out. I had a case like this in Arizona where the people asked, like, why are you contacting us? And they said, well, we are helping people who are helping others. And this was an elderly couple from Hawaii. And they do social work in their community. She's an herbal healer. And I'm like, well, there's that pattern again. I see it over and over and over again.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool to know that they're contacting the people that are also willing to help the other people here on Earth.
Yes, I just I can't give out this person's name, but I know I used to be on the fire department back in the day. I know a former firefighter who excuse me, this guy is still a firefighter, and he just recently came out to me and said that he had an experience. And I think I'm the only person he's ever told this to, just because he recently found out that I started speaking out about this stuff. So I feel like it's the people who are making a difference or making impacts. I think about like artists and musicians too, especially whenever you look at old art, like I think Leonardo da Vinci and stuff. Whenever you look at his art, and you have to see UFOs and stuff hidden in the background. It almost makes you think they're putting like clues back then, hundreds of years ago, to let people now today know that they knew what was going on back then. And I mean, that's at least my theory about that.
Yeah, lots of artists. I forgot to mention that. My sister-in-law. Yeah, and I just talked to a paramedic not too long ago. He's having major contact. He was telling now his parent, he's like, I've saved about 200 people's lives. I'm like, damn, that is crazy. They are definitely interested in helping people who are helping others.
Well, we don't want to take up too much more of your time, Preston, because it is Saturday and I don't want to take up your whole weekend. This has been a really, really awesome interview.
It's really good, Preston. It was very entertaining. I got to see it from both sides. I was in the chat before I jumped back in here, trying to help out in chat, and man, even seeing it from our viewers' view, man, it's awesome. This was a great show, guys.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, Preston. We'll have to have you on again soon.
Hey, anytime. I love talking about this stuff. It's important. People might say, I don't believe in UFOs. It's not affecting me. I'm like, yes, it is. And it's going to in a big way.
More than
it's important stuff.
Yep. So too.
More people. I know without a doubt. So many people that I never in a million years. Well, I'm not going to say so many, but I would say about maybe a dozen now people I never in a million years would I imagine be talking to me about this kind of stuff. Somehow or another, they found out that I'm into it, and they've been actually coming up to me in private and ask me. And I think there might be one of them in the chat right now. I'm not sure, but if he is, I'm not going to say your name, but I'm glad you came. And I'm sure he's going to be watching it later on. But yeah, it's definitely getting way more mainstream. People are starting to notice this and take it a lot more serious. And I think the fear factor is going away, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, we're talking about it in more of a positive, uplifting manner, and people are like, "Oh, really? They're trying to help us, huh?"
Yep, I can't wait to see what happens in the future. I'm a little worried about our government and what they're going to do next, but really interested to see what the ET's next step is and how people, what's going to happen. This is an exciting time.
Are they going to be walking around here with us? That's what I want to know. Yeah, like are they just going to be in the streets with us? I don't know. I'm so curious, really.
That's another thing, guys. Too. We've gone from when are they going to start telling people? We've gone from that to what are they going to tell people next? So we're getting closer. Yeah,
we are getting a little closer.
Yeah, we know they're here now. When am I going to run to one in the shopping mall? Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, they're out there. I mean, they are human-looking ETs. Don't forget that. They are among us for sure.
I have a weird Anunnaki story I'd love to tell you some other time. I didn't get time to get into it today. I don't know for 100% if this guy was a real Anunnaki, but I will say he blew my mind. Chad and Sonny, they know this story. It's really crazy. But this guy did his best to convince me. I gotta say, it kind of shook me a little bit. He yeah. Honestly, I'd be going on for 30 minutes if I got in that subject. But that's
I was gonna tell Preston, yeah, if he gets us talking, man, we can go for 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, I've got some ET Among Us stories for sure. So yeah, maybe next time.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of them.
I think we were almost 7 last night, Chad.
What's that?
I think we went for almost 7 or 8 last night.
Yeah, it was a few hours we were on the air for. That's what you got to do when you have good guests. You got to go on when you can get them.
Yeah, I had a great time talking to you on here, Preston. It was really surreal, to be honest. And thanks for, I know you went over like 30 minutes more than what we normally go on with people on here, but well, not when it's just the guys here. Sometimes we go on for over 3 hours. But yeah, I really appreciate you being on here with us.
Yeah, we'll have to have
my
you on
pleasure.
again.
Yeah, anytime. I love it.
Cool. Well, hopefully everybody goes to his website here. I'll put it up here again one more time. PrestonDennett.weebly.com. He's got a plethora of books on there that you can check out. And we'll have him on again soon. So thanks everybody for hanging out with us and watching the broadcast. And we will see you next time.
Take care, guys.